Okay, so our meeting is being recorded. This is October 15th, and this is our second revision class. So this is the session that I should be teaching at 2, but because I'm putting you together, uh, we are starting at 3. I'm talking specifically about 1302. This is the original session, and of course, we also have with us 1303, right? Yes. Okay, so it's the second revision class, and we're of course revising the MTA or revising for the MTA. We met yesterday, and it was very fruitful. We spoke about lots of issues and lots of things. We did um, talk about Othello, and we also spoke about the Duchess of Malfi. So what is left is obviously Candide. We also spoke about the different backgrounds, backgrounds to the time periods that we're doing, and we said those time periods are very informative, and they can tell us a great deal when we study the works. I mean, they can inform the discussion when it comes to asking why society is behaving in a certain way, why the character is doing this or that. I also spoke about the exam in terms of um, layout, and I said that the exam is divided into 2 sections. We said that we have a section on short answers, and the other section is long answers or essay questions. And I spoke about my expectations, and I warned you against um, writing too little, and perhaps writing too much isn't as dangerous as writing too little. And I also stressed the fact that there is no such thing as I don't know. You know a lot, and you have more knowledge than you give yourself credit for. It's now the challenge would be with relevance and clarity. And relevance and clarity can only come if you spend a sufficient amount of time on the question or the prompt, reading it very well, reading the close reading passage if there is a passage or a quote, highlighting the key words and the key concepts, and also checking the guidelines, I mean, or the instruction words. What is it that the examiner wants me to do? Um, so this is basically how it should go. Short answers, and they are 2. I mean, you're required to answer 2, and long answers or essay questions, and you have to write one essay question. Um, Before I get started, before I talk about Candide, I would like you to come to the mic if you guys have any questions on Othello and the Duchess of Malfi and the different backgrounds that we have been talking about for so long. Go ahead. No questions. Okay. Which is obviously not a very healthy sign. It means that you have perhaps you haven't started preparing for the final exam, and the final exam is the day after tomorrow. Um, um, I'm hopeful that I'm mistaken in assuming that you haven't started, because you should have started way back. Anyway, um, let's talk about Candide. Let's talk about the issues and the ideas and the ideologies that the writer is addressing in Candide. First of all, you need to know that Candide was written in the 18th century. When we talk about the 18th century, we talk about an age of progress, an age of prosperity, seeming prosperity. Of course, you still have people who are poor always and everywhere. So you don't have absolute riches or absolute happiness. So people were assuming that they are happy. They were under the impression that history is moving in a linear way and that progress will not never end or stop. And there were signs for that. There were more education, there was more advancement, more geographical discoveries. So those were very good enough reasons for people in Europe to believe, to be happy. That's why we have this philosophy of optimism, cutting across um, the entire continent. I mean, Europe, and and people started to kind of theorize about it, talk about reasons why people should be happy in the 18th century. Again, um, some of the reasons were material, things that they saw on the grounds. They saw progress, they saw advancement, they saw that they are better than the other continents, they are more powerful than the other continents, they are much richer than the other continents, perhaps more educated. These were material pieces of evidence for them. And then they started to theorize about, to philosophize about it. And that's why you would have philosophers and poets like Alexander Pope and philosophers like um, Leibniz, perhaps providing philosophical underpinnings for this kind of happiness. Um, and of course, the people of the church, Catholics, and the idea um um, of living in a benevolent world, living in a world governed by a benevolent being. And so we should be happy that we are where we are in terms of this grand scheme of things. And if there is partial evil, فَمِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ, like they say. It's not that there is something faulty or bad about the world, because it cannot, because the world has been created by a benevolent God. So people need to, if they see evil, they need to know that this is partial, and this evil is part of a larger scheme of things, and everything is for the better, and everything is, the perspective should be bigger, and also referring to the fact that you cannot compete with God when it comes to why he is doing this and that, because obviously God is more knowing and all knowing, and God is more powerful, all powerful. So this was the ideas that were widespread in the 18th century. People were happy whether they have religious interpretation for what is happening, even if there is evil things, or they have material, happiness and material progress that show them that they live in the best of all possible worlds. Obviously, a sector of society wasn't happy about this. A sector of uh, society who used their minds, who were empirical in their attitudes. Empirical means that they believe that in order for us to believe in something, we have to see it, we have to touch it, we have to hear it, we have to use our um, senses, our different sense experience. So the only thing that can make me believe is to see and to use my senses. So if I cannot do that, it means that it's not good enough. So empirical philosophers like Voltaire, the writer of Candide, would come and say, um, "Show me happens. Don't talk to me about happiness. It is true that we have material progress. It is true that we have advancement, but it is also true that physically we have pain in the world. It is also true that physically we still have disease. It is uh, true, also true that people die. So the justification for absolute happiness and absolute uh, optimism is faulty. Something is wrong. So this is what the whole novella is about. It's about those competing narratives. You have um, a narrative that tells us that everything is all right, that everything is perfect, that we should be happy with what we have. And you have the other narrative that tells us no, life is not as beautiful as everybody is saying. Is not, Life has this sordid aspect to it. It is gloomy, we still die, we still feel pain, we still have wars. And they would highlight the fact that we have evils of all types, whether this evil is natural, when we have natural disasters like earthquakes and volcanoes, or moral evil, when we have people killing each other, waging wars against each other. So the two types of evil are there in the world. So no reason to be as happy or as optimistic. So how does Voltaire address this issue? I mean, he doesn't produce philosophical tracts like Plato. He doesn't give us a book in which he talks about the problem of evil in the world, or why we have disease, or why he is against optimism in the 18th century. What he does is that he gives us um, a creative piece of work, a piece of fiction, and where you have characters behaving, moving around and behaving in certain ways. And then you, as a reader, you get the messages that he is trying to get across to you. So his approach is an indirect one. He doesn't tell you what he thinks. He doesn't lecture you. He doesn't give us lectures. No, he gives you a piece of a creative piece of work, a piece of fiction, and a novella, and then you have characters doing this and that, and you pick up the clues and the messages that he is giving us. Um, and that would bring us to the idea of genres. And we would have the question about Candide. What kind of work is it? What is the literary type? And people start to talk about it being a philosophical tale, because it has a lot of philosophy, because it talks about optimism and it attacks and exposes optimism. So that would make it tale, because you have people, you have characters and they move and they do this. You have a plot that would make it a tale. and philosophical because of the philosophical ideas that those people address and talk about over the course of the journey that takes them from one country to another. Some other people would say it's a novel, a roman in the French sense, roman. But what they notice is that the novella or this novella does not fully meet all the requirements of a novel. It fails to achieve that. That's why they would discard it and say, no, it can't be a roman. So if it's not a roman and if it's not a philosophical tale, perhaps it's a satire. Yeah, satire. It is. Satire is a piece of work where um, characters, people and their follies, whether those follies are social or even religious, are being exposed, are being challenged, challenged uh, um, in a comic way. So there is a great deal of ridicule happening. So the writer, in an indirect way, ridicules people and their actions and behaviors. And this is happening on a large scale in this novella. So it can be a satire, and it is also an indirect satire. Indirect in the sense that you don't have ready-made labels. The writer, Voltaire, does not stick labels to the characters. He doesn't, he puts us or he puts the characters in situations where you can get the satirical messages. So he doesn't say it clearly. So, I mean, he trusts that you have a capable mind as a human being and you can come up with lots of messages and ideas out of the whole thing. We need to also remember that this is a narrative, which means that it is a story. And this kind of narrative is a travel narrative. And travel narratives were also all over the place. Obviously, Voltaire is not the one who invented those travel narratives or travelogues. They have been there ever since Herodotus, and Herodotus happens to be uh, a Greek historian. So this was before the Common Era, before the Christian era, قبل الميلاد يعني. So you would have Herodotus moving around, moving. Perhaps he went to Egypt and went to the way to Anatolia, went here, and he is Greek, and he moves within this Mediterranean basin. And he collects impressions about the people and their behaviors. He focuses on their traditions and religious beliefs. And then you have in the Christian era another historian. And also he registers his impressions about the behaviors of people. And then we move on to perhaps the 15th or the 16th century, where we have Thomas More with his Utopia, also talking about, or perhaps this was quite imaginary because it didn't exist. Even the word utopia means nowhere. So it's a place that's an ideal place where people are equal, where women are given the rights, where you don't have um, private property, you have equal claim to the wealth of the nation or the country. So these are, of course, abstractions and abstract things that can never be achieved. That's why we say utopia. And then you go down and you have people like Jonathan Swift also giving us Gulliver's Travels, where Um, he talks, I mean, there is also travels. And during those travels, I mean, the follies of communities and societies are being exposed. And then you move on, and you have, you know, Samuel Johnson um, writing also a travelogue uh, from, I mean, I think it was called the Rasselas, Prince of Abyssinia, and Abyssinia happens to be modern day Ethiopia. And again, it's about looking for a perfect place or a perfect world. So this is the trajectory of travelogues and travel narratives of uh, which um, Candide is part. Again, the focus in Candide is on exposing and challenging this sweeping mood of optimism that was kind of widespread and prevalent during the time. Again, we spoke about those who were promoting this kind of optimism and laying down those philosophical underpinnings for them. We spoke about Leibniz, we spoke about Alexander Pope, we even spoke about the church. When everything fails, when we cannot convince you that there is still evil in the world, whether it is moral or natural, we will tell you that it's your fault, not anybody else's. It's your fault because you are the inheritor of the original sin. You are the descendant of Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve, plucked the forbidden fruit, disobeyed God, and they tell you that we inherit their sin. That's why we have evil. If they haven't done that, we wouldn't have had evil, whether it is moral or natural. So this is when they cannot convince you. This is when you're not convinced with what Leibniz is saying about the fact that God is all powerful and all knowing, and you cannot compete with God when it comes to knowing about the world, because as a human being, you're limited in ability and also in knowledge. And then when you're also not convinced with what Alexander Pope is saying about um, human beings, again, being looking at the half uh, empty part of the glass, being limited, not realizing the fact that this is all partial evil. And obviously, you have to look at, and then this partial evil is part of a larger plan. Um, so this is how it goes. There is a great deal of talk about that, but this is indirect talk. It's given through situations and incidents. Um, we start off from Lisbon. We were in Westphalia, of course, and then there was this 7-year war, and people were butchering each other, and then they move on to Lisbon, only to find that there is an earthquake that claimed the lives of thousands of people, and it was a feast, a religious one. And then they move on and they go to other countries, ostensibly looking for Kjonigan, who happens to be the lady love of Candide. I'm saying ostensibly because this is not what Voltaire has in mind. This is a fictional and dramatic tool that Voltaire is using. So the excuse would for them to move from one country to another is to look for Königen, but the real reason is to look for a better place, to look for to search for real happiness, for sources of happiness that can make us believe that yeah, we live in the best of all possible worlds, that some place can be the best of all possible worlds, that some place can be perfect. Obviously they moved from one country to another, and each country and each place has its stories. And what we see from and within those countries is representatives of those countries, and primarily women receiving abuse of all types, um, women are given space to talk about their calamities and dilemmas, moral and otherwise, and how they were abused, how they were reduced to prostitution and all kinds of bad stuff. And then you have at one point in one country a slave. You have a slave whose limbs are cut, and obviously he feels that he is more miserable than perhaps cats and dogs and all those kinds of stray animals. And then at one point they would go to El Dorado, which is a seemingly perfect place where gold has no value, where people live until they become 100, 140 or 50 or perhaps more years. And obviously, they live that long because they they adopt a very simple style of living. They are simple. They are not. They don't fall into the trap of material cupidity, if you like. No material cupidity. They are not interested in material things, and this is perhaps one way of looking at a perfect world. If we're less materialistic, if we're less obsessed with money and with careers and stuff like that. So perhaps El Dorado was an answer to this question about a perfect world. So El Dorado can be the perfect world that Voltaire has in mind. So if the place is perfect, you need also to have perfect people. You need to look at how Candide and Cocambo dealt with that. Were they happy? Momentarily, they were happy with the place because they saw gold. But when they found that people are not interested in gold, they got amazed, and they started to kind of they didn't want to stay and live the simple life that other people in El Dorado live in, because this is I mean, perhaps Voltaire is trying to say that we as human beings we're not as good as we claim to be. So it's obviously not about the simplicity of living. We're not after that. We are in love with material stuff. That's why they couldn't resist the urge to take all the gold that they can have and then go back to the old world with its material values and all those. So it means that if you find the perfect place, you don't find uh, perfect people for it. They are not up to it. I mean, people from the old world, Candide and all the others, are not qualified to live in a perfect place. And then they move all the way to other places until they reach their final destination, which is Constantinople, modern day Turkey. And this is also another way of looking at how people can be happy and how um, there can be a perfect place. And this perfect place um, is not because it's not perfect because you have material stuff. It's not perfect because you have excellent rulers and democracy and all those kinds of no. He's trying to hint at the fact that uh, um, Turkey and Constantinople are part of the Muslim world where you have absolute rulers. And those people believe in the idea of fate. They are fatalists. Fatalists means that they believe that their rulers are their destiny. And that's why they don't fight against their tyranny, against their oppression. But this, I mean, obviously, he doesn't concern himself with this. He concerns himself with the idea that you don't care about those grand ideas, whether there is free will or predestination, whether there is democracy or absolutism. He doesn't care about that. He cares about the idea that in Turkey, he has seen people who mind their own business. They just focus on themselves. They focus on their own well-being. They believe that you need to start with yourself. You don't lecture the world about morality and you are morally corrupt and morally bankrupt yourself. So this was the message that Candide and Pangloss were getting from the dervish and also from the old man. Remember when they went to the old man, uh, he was not very happy about how talkative Pangloss is, and he asked him and asked Candide to mind their own business and to tend their own garden. Okay, so again, and I gave you this analogy the other day. You go out of your room and perhaps lecture your younger brother or sister on how they should behave and how they should be organized. And the next thing you know is that you're leaving your room upside down. You didn't even set your own bed. Okay, so charity begins at home. So before you lecture people about this and that, you need to start with yourself. So this seems to be the message in Turkey, that people mind their own business. They live away from the hustle and bustle of city life even. So this is also indirect, and this is typical of Voltaire. Remember, we said that he never imposes his views on us. I mean, he gives us situations and people interacting and acting and interacting, and you have to come up with your own conclusion. So this is Candide in a nutshell. Um, so what do we normally have when it comes to Candide? And I'm talking about exams. Normally in midterms, and also in finals, there is always talk about optimism and the justifications for those kinds of optimism on the one hand, and those counter arguments. So you have the argument for optimism as given uh, um, by Leibniz, Alexander Pope, uh, and the other philosophers. And you have a counter argument, given by uh, um, Voltaire, and he gives us uh, um, this polemic against optimism by giving us situations like the Lisbon earthquake, like the miseries and the dehumanization of women, like the cutting of the limbs of the slave in Suriname. Um, so this is the main idea. I mean, you have two competing narratives, optimism and counter-optimism. And each is trying to perhaps convince us as readers that their way of life, and then that their approach is better than the other, and whether those who believe that we live in the best of all possible worlds, or those who believe that we perhaps this is the worst ever, we still have pain and disease and moral evil in the world. Um, what else when we talk about Candide? Sometimes in short answers, questions, you have ideas about travel narrative. Sometimes you have ideas about the fact that obviously Candide is as a travel narrative is not the first, and you're sometimes asked to trace and track down this kind of genre. You go all the way back to Herodotus, um, and you write a survey of those kinds of narratives. What else? Sometimes you have close reading where you have a passage from the novel and or the novella, and it's very significant. Sometimes it's very significant. And it also has to do with this idea of optimism. Perhaps Bangladesh is speaking, reflecting on this kind of optimism and giving reasons why people should be happy. Sometimes you have a passage that shows us um, how miserable one of the women is, which is obviously a reference to her part of the story. Um, sometimes you have a passage that shows us that life is not honey and milk, and that there is evil, natural evil in the world. For example, if you still remember, I gave you the example of the Anabaptist who was left to drown because, uh, according to Pangloss, the port was made or created for him to kind of drown in it and stuff like that. So when it comes to essay questions with Candide, there is sometimes talk about women and their plight and their dilemmas, and how history is written from the perspective and the view, the angle of vision of its victims, like women, like minorities, like the Anabaptists, the Jews, uh, the colored, the slaves, and women. Um, so this is what we have in Candide. Um, so do you have any questions on Candide? Somebody was raising her hand. Yeah, Ragad, go ahead. You were raising your hand. Okay. So let's have
Doctor, can I have a question, please?
yeah, have a question, please. Go ahead.
Yes. It's about Voltaire satire. It's going. Are we going to have a question like compare between satire and irony? It's not have the same meaning, or maybe we can write a short answer about comparison with it
No, we don't
between them.
compare. Normally, we compare apple to apple and oranges to oranges. Obviously, satires and ironies are two different things. So we wouldn't compare them to each other. We can ask you about satire. We can ask you to define what satire is. We can ask you to define what irony is, but they don't come together. Are you getting my point?
Yes, doctor. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Indeed. Yeah, go ahead, yeah, Reem.
Doctor, is a question about
the Duchess of Malfi, not Candide. It's about the Duchess' children.
Mm.
Um, will we have um,
You guys are obsessed with the Dutch children because I was asked this question yesterday and I said this is not very significant. But go on, tell me, perhaps you're yeah, you're talking about something else. Go ahead, Irene. Go on.
and no, I just if it could be comes in like a short answer or an essay.
Yeah, about the children of the Duchess.
Yes,
I mean, what kind of question? I mean, what are we going to ask about when we mention the children?
if they
Uh,
died or maybe or they lived or
Well,
who's
this is a high, even not a high school question. We don't ask you about events and who killed whom and why. No, this is we're bigger than that. English major
okay.
students are supposed to analyze, to break stuff down to its basic components, be more philosophical in their answers. So we don't go that down and ask you about events. No, we don't ask you this. Yeah,
Okay, thank you, doctor.
you're welcome, Miriam. Hmm. Any more questions? I mean, let's yani, open it. So it's not Candide anymore. It can be Candide or the other works, Othello or the Duchess of Malfi. You're not as active as you were yesterday. Why is that? Where is everyone? I can see all the faces that I saw yesterday, but mm, but less activity. Um, are you still processing the information? That's why you're taking your time. You don't want to commit yourself to an answer or what? Okay. So if the exam is an hour or 2 hours from now, are you ready? I'm asking everyone. If the exam is at 5 o'clock,
Yes.
yeah, you think you're
Yes,
ready, right?
inshallah, Doctor.
Yes. Okay. You feel comfortable? Did we do enough? I mean, did we read enough? Did we kind of analyze stuff enough? Do you still feel that there are gaps that need to be filled, perhaps? Are we on top of things in terms of the knowledge that we have?
I just wanted to ask Professor about Othello's critics.
Yeah.
Are Bradley and Levis the
Do I
most
need
important
to
ones?
memorize?
This one?
Yeah, let's finish with Aya, and I think somebody else has a question. Yeah, Aya, you're asking about the critics.
Yes, if
Uh,
Bradley
uh,
and Levis are the most important ones to focus on.
when we talk about them, we have those competing viewpoints about the character of Othello. So normally you have uh, questions are about those competing narratives and those competing voices. You have people who are for Othello, and we spoke about Nelson Knight, Wilson Knight, and and I keep forgetting the name of the other guy. Wilson Knight and else. That will come to me perhaps later. So on the one hand, you have Wilson Knight and his other colleague talking about
Do
um,
you mean
uh,
Eliot?
no, no, AC Bradley, AC Bradley, right? So AC Bradley and Wilson Knight on one side, and they love Othello. They find excuses to what he did, And on the other hand, you have, leaves or leaves, and you have T.S. Eliot believing that Othello is guilty as charged, like they say. He is guilty, and um, he was doing that out of self-dramatization. He was putting himself in situations, and he was creating atmospheres where he can be either uh, lauded and praised for his achievements, and if not, he can be petted. He can be put in compromising situations where he can stir our pity. Um, so these are the competing narratives, and those are the competing voices that you should be focusing on, two and two. Okay, so it merits an essay. If it's a question, it normally comes in the form of a long essay.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Yeah, yeah. More questions? Aya, are you the one who sent me something on the WhatsApp group yesterday or last night?
Yes, it's about Othello's final speech.
Yes. Remember, I think I answered this question without you asking before we left yesterday, last night, and I spoke about this idea that Othello was coming to terms with the fact that he is the Negro that they are making of him, the heathen that they are making of him, the foreigner that they are making of him. So he was used eventually as a tool to kill the heathen in himself, to kill the foreigner in himself. He internalized what they said, the bad things that they said about him, the bad things that they associated with him. So it was very important for perhaps the well-being of society at the time that Othello gets killed, so that they can get rid of this idea of foreignness, this idea of uh, um, kind of flouting and challenging established orders and established hierarchies. He had to do that. So this is what he was fighting at the end. He was fighting his foreignness. He internalized all those bad things, all those prejudices against him. He started to believe in those things. That's why he killed himself to perhaps get himself and the entire society of those, to rid himself of those things. This is what you're going to talk about.